This story contains themes of mystery and suspense that some listeners may find unsettling. Every town has its crown jewel, a landmark that defines its very soul. For Oakhaven, that jewel was our town square gazebo. It stood proudly at the heart of everything, a white wrought iron sentinel beneath ancient oak trees, witnessing generations of summer concerts, wedding proposals, and 4th of July fireworks. To look at it, you'd see nothing but Norman Rockwell perfection, a postcard of American innocence. But my grandmother, Eleanor Vance, always saw something else. She said the gazebo didn't just stand on the town square. It stood over something ancient, something dark, and something desperately wanting to be found. I'm Sarah Miller, and I never truly understood the chilling weight of her words until I came back to Oakhaven. My grandmother had passed away a year ago, leaving me her sprawling, slightly dilapidated Victorian house on Elm Street. After years of chasing history in dusty archives across the country, Oakhaven felt like a retreat, a quiet corner where I could finally unpack my own life, and perhaps unpack some of Eleanor's lingering eccentricities. I'd always dismissed her gazebo theories as the whimsical ramblings of an old woman with too much time and an overactive imagination. She'd speak of whispers carried on the wind from beneath its floorboards, of shadows that stretched too long even in the brightest noon, of a secret so profound it had shaped Oakhaven from its very foundations. I'd just smile, nod, and change the subject. Now I wish I had listened, truly listened. Oakhaven truly is picturesque. Nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests, it boasts a population of just under 3,000 souls, most of whom have lived here their entire lives. Everyone knows everyone. The aroma of fresh-baked bread from Mrs. Henderson's bakery mingles with the scent of pine from the lumber mill. Kids ride bikes down Main Street, leaving them unlocked outside the general store. It's the kind of place where you expect life to unfold gently, predictably. The gazebo, naturally, was the town's pride. Built in 1887, a gift from Oakhaven's founding families, it was the backdrop for every significant moment in the town's history. The annual summer festival always kicked off there. The mayor delivered his speeches from its elevated platform. Teenagers carved their initials into its sturdy wooden posts, just as their grandparents had. It was a symbol of continuity, of community, of everything good and wholesome. But even as I settled into Eleanor's house, beginning the daunting task of sorting through decades of accumulated memories and clutter, my grandmother's words began to echo. I found myself drawn to the town square, my gaze lingering on the gazebo, searching for the subtle signs she claimed to see. The way the light hit it at dusk, casting long, almost skeletal shadows. The unyielding silence around it, even when the rest of the square buzzed with activity. It was a beautiful structure, undeniably, but now a faint tremor of unease started to ripple beneath my perception of its charm. My first real dive into Oakhaven's past wasn't intentional, at least not regarding the gazebo. I decided to volunteer for the town's upcoming bicentennial celebration. As a historian, it felt like a natural fit, a way to connect with the community and honor Eleanor's memory. The Bicentennial Committee, a group of Oakhaven's oldest and most influential citizens, including Mayor Thompson, was thrilled to have me. They tasked me with compiling a historical timeline, focusing on the town's early days and, of course, the significance of the gazebo. "It's our cornerstone, Sarah," Mayor Thompson had boomed, his voice hearty and reassuring. "Its history is the town's history." That's when I started to notice the gaps. Eleanor's house was a treasure trove of local history, albeit a chaotic one. She'd been an amateur archivist, hoarding old newspapers, town records, family letters, and countless personal journals. Most of it was disorganized, but I knew she kept everything. As I began my research for the bicentennial, I'd spend hours poring over her collection, cross-referencing official town documents with her personal notes. The deeper I dug, the more I realized something was off. The official records were pristine, almost too perfect. They painted a picture of uninterrupted prosperity and peace since Oakhaven's founding. But Eleanor's journals, scattered among recipes and gardening tips, told a different story. Her handwriting, usually neat and precise, became frantic in certain entries. She'd doodle strange symbols in the margins, circles with intersecting lines, or crude sketches of what looked like roots twisting downwards. She wrote about the old ways, about the truth beneath the planking, about the families who built on silence. She spoke of a fire, a tragedy in the town's early days that seemed to be completely absent from the official town archives. A fire that, according to her, was tied directly to the construction of the gazebo. One afternoon, while sifting through a dusty box labeled Vance Family Correspondence pre-1950, I found a small leather-bound diary tucked beneath a stack of faded postcards. It wasn't Eleanor's. The elegant, looping script inside belonged to my great-great-aunt Clara Vance, who had lived in Oakhaven in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. She was known to be a recluse, a quiet woman who rarely left her home. Yet, her diary entries painted a vivid, unsettling picture of Oakhaven during the gazebo's construction. Clara wrote about a fever that swept through the town shortly after the gazebo was completed, claiming dozens of lives, particularly among the children. She described the town's desperate attempts to find a cure, the fear that gripped everyone. But what truly caught my attention were the entries detailing a strange phenomenon, a persistent, low hum that Clara claimed emanated from beneath the newly built gazebo. She wrote about hearing it late at night, a vibration that seemed to travel through the earth itself, making the windows of her nearby house rattle faintly. She mentioned how some townsfolk began to act strangely, their eyes vacant, their movements sluggish, almost as if they were sleepwalking. And then there was the disappearance. A young man named Thomas Redding, a carpenter who had worked on the gazebo, vanished without a trace, just weeks after its completion. The official story, recorded in a single terse newspaper clipping Eleanor had meticulously preserved, was that he'd left town for better opportunities out west. But Clara's diary offered a chilling alternative. She wrote that Thomas had been acting erratically, claiming he had found something beneath the gazebo's foundations, something not meant for human eyes. He'd confided in Clara that he was afraid, that he felt watched, and that they wouldn't let him speak. His last entry, dated the day before his disappearance, was simple and terrifying. The hum is growing stronger. They know I saw. It's under the wood. They buried it here. All of them. The families. The families. It was the same phrase Eleanor had used, scrawling it repeatedly in the margins of her own journals. The founding families. The pillars of Oakhaven society. The very people who had commissioned and funded the gazebo. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This wasn't just a quaint town landmark. This wasn't just my grandmother's wild imagination. Clara's diary, her detailed, terrified accounts, suddenly made Eleanor's whispers feel less like madness and more like a desperate attempt to warn me. The official history of Oakhaven, the one I was supposed to be celebrating for the bicentennial, was a carefully constructed lie. And the truth, I was beginning to suspect, lay buried directly beneath the most innocent-looking structure in town. The gazebo. That night sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded like a whisper, a low hum, a warning. I found myself drawn to the window, staring out at the distant glow of the town square lights, where the gazebo stood, silent and imposing. It no longer looked like a symbol of community. It looked like a tombstone. And I had a terrible sinking feeling that whatever was buried beneath it, whatever Thomas Redding had seen, wasn't just a forgotten secret. It was a living, breathing entity, patiently waiting for someone to finally dig deep enough to disturb its long slumber. That feeling, that icy dread, it clung to me like a shroud. Thomas Redding's words, his frantic warnings, echoed in my mind, painting a terrifying picture of something ancient and malevolent stirring beneath the very heart of our quiet town. It wasn't just a secret, he'd insisted. It was a presence, a force. And now I couldn't unsee it. The gazebo, once a symbol of community and peace, now loomed in my thoughts, a silent sentinel over an unimaginable horror. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was the ramblings of an old man, perhaps a touch too isolated, a mind playing tricks. But the tremor in his voice, the raw, visceral fear in his eyes, that wasn't something you could fake. Thomas Redding had seen something, felt something, and it had broken him. And now he had passed that burden, that terrifying glimpse into the abyss, onto me. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every shadow danced with unseen shapes. Every creak of the old house sounded like a whisper from below. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of what Thomas had told me. He'd mentioned strange lights, a humming sound, and a sense of immense cold, even on the hottest summer nights, emanating from the ground beneath the gazebo. He'd spoken of a feeling of being watched, a pervasive sense of dread that had driven him to dig, to uncover the truth, only to be confronted by something so profound, so utterly wrong, that he'd fled, never truly recovering. The following morning, a restless energy surged through me. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I couldn't just ignore this. Thomas Redding's plea, his desperate warning, demanded more than dismissal. It demanded investigation. But where to even begin? The town square gazebo had stood for generations, a landmark, a gathering place. How could something so sinister lie hidden beneath such an innocuous, beloved structure? My first stop was the town hall. Not to ask direct questions, not yet. I needed to be subtle, to gather information without drawing attention. I requested access to old town planning documents, specifically anything related to the original construction of the town square and the gazebo itself. The clerk, a cheerful woman named Sarah with bright, inquisitive eyes, seemed surprised by my interest. The gazebo? Oh, that's been there forever, hasn't it? She mused, her fingers dancing over a dusty index. Most people come in for property taxes or building permits, not historical architecture. I mumbled something about a personal project and interest in local history. Sarah, bless her heart, was helpful if a little too curious. She led me to a back room, a cavern of forgotten files and ancient blueprints. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and dust, a silent testament to decades of forgotten municipal life. Took hours. I sifted through brittle maps, faded architectural drawings, and handwritten ledger entries detailing material costs and labor. Most of it was mundane. Timber orders, concrete specifications, payroll for the construction crew. But as the afternoon waned, a pattern, or rather, a lack of pattern, began to emerge. The original plans for the town square, drawn up in the late 1800s, were remarkably detailed. Every bench, every lamppost, every tree planting was meticulously accounted for. But when it came to the gazebo, there was a strange anomaly. The initial blueprint showed a different design, a larger, more ornate structure, with a prominent foundation clearly marked. However, a later revision, dated just a few months after the initial plans were approved, showed the gazebo as it stood today, smaller, simpler, and with a surprisingly shallow foundation, almost as if it were an afterthought or a hasty cover-up. Even more unsettling was a small, almost illegible handwritten note scrawled in the margin of the revised plan. It simply read, "Site stability concerns. Reevaluation required. Expedite new design." Site stability concerns? What kind of concerns? There was no geological report attached. No mention of unusual soil conditions or subterranean water sources. Nothing to explain such a drastic last-minute change to a prominent public structure. Felt deliberate, as if something had been encountered during the initial digging, something that necessitated a complete change of plans and a much shallower excavation. My heart began to pound with a slow, heavy rhythm. This was it. This was the first thread. Thomas Redding hadn't imagined it. There was something beneath that gazebo, something that had caused the original builders to recoil, to redesign, to bury whatever they had found under a superficial structure. I decided to try a different angle. The town library, a quaint brick building just off Main Street, held the town's archived newspapers. Perhaps a local journalist, perhaps someone from the past, had noticed something amiss. The librarian, a stern but kind woman named Eleanor Vance, directed me to the microfiche readers. "Looking for anything in particular, young man?" she asked, her voice a dry rustle of old leaves. "The late 1800s, I replied, trying to sound casual. "Specifically, the period around when the town square was developed. Any major events, local news." Eleanor nodded, a knowing glint in her eye. "Ah, the good old days. Or perhaps not so good, depending on what you're looking for. A lot happened back then, son. A lot of things got swept under the rug, too." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Swept under the rug. Was she hinting at something? Or was it just an old woman's cynical view of history? I spent the rest of the day in that dimly lit room. The whirring of the microfiche machine a hypnotic drone. Page after page illuminated on the flickering screen. Advertisements for general stores, notices of town council meetings, reports on crop yields. All the mundane details of a burgeoning American town. Then I found it. Not a headline, not a scandal, but a series of small, almost easily missed articles published over a period of about 6 months, roughly coinciding with the revised gazebo plans. The first was a brief mention of unexplained illnesses affecting several members of the original construction crew working on the town square. Descriptions included debilitating fatigue, uncontrollable tremors, and a profound sense of despair. Doctors were baffled, attributing it to a mysterious fever, that seemed to defy conventional diagnosis. No deaths were reported in connection with this initial outbreak, but several workers reportedly left town, never to return. A few weeks later, another article, even smaller, detailed the disappearance of a foreman, a man named David Miller, who had been overseeing the initial excavation work for the gazebo's foundation. The article speculated he had simply skipped town with some outstanding debts, but there was a strange, almost defensive tone to the reporting, as if trying too hard to explain away a sudden vanishing act. No body was ever found. No trace. Then the final, most chilling piece. A short notice buried deep in the classified section, announcing the sudden, unexpected resignation of the town's chief architect, a respected figure named Michael Peterson. The reason cited was personal health reasons, but I remembered the detailed, almost obsessive nature of his initial blueprints, the precision. For such a man to abandon a project he had poured his heart into for vague health reasons felt profoundly out of character. It felt like he had been silenced or perhaps had fled in terror. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the microfiche. The pieces were starting to connect, forming a terrifying mosaic. A mysterious illness, a disappearing foreman, a fleeing architect, all centered around the time the gazebo's foundation was being dug. They hadn't just encountered site stability concerns. They had encountered something that made people sick, made them vanish, made them abandon their lives. And Thomas Redding, over a century later, had stumbled upon it again. The implications were staggering. The town square wasn't just a park. It was a burial ground. The gazebo wasn't just a structure. It was a cap, a seal placed over something ancient and malevolent. And now I had disturbed its history. I had started to peel back the layers of dust and silence. As I left the library, the sun was setting, casting long skeletal shadows across the town square. The gazebo, silhouetted against the bruised purple sky, seemed to pulse with a dark energy. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a sense of being utterly alone, utterly exposed. I had opened a door that should have remained shut, awakened a history that wanted to stay buried. And then just as I reached my car, I saw it flicker, a faint, almost imperceptible light, deep beneath the gazebo, just for a split second, like a breath taken in the dark. My breath hitched in my throat. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving me questioning my own sanity. Was it a trick of the light? Or was it real? Was it a warning? Or worse, was it an acknowledgement? A silent, knowing gaze from the depths, letting me know that I too was now seen. That whatever Thomas Redding had disturbed, whatever had made those men sick and vanish, whatever had forced an architect to flee, was now aware of my presence. And it was waiting. I pulled my hand back as if burned, the chill from the murky water clinging to my skin, a phantom touch of something ancient and malevolent. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, oppressive silence of the night. My breath hitched in my throat, and I stumbled backward, away from the concrete lip of the pit, away from the invisible gaze that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this cursed town and never look back. But even as I scrambled away, my eyes were still fixed on the black surface of the water, half expecting to see some form rise from its depths, some monstrous shape to confirm the horror I felt. Of course, nothing appeared. The water remained still, reflecting only the distant glow of the streetlights, an innocent, placid surface that belied the terror it held. My mind, ever the rationalist, immediately began to construct excuses. Lack of sleep, the stress of the past few days, the unsettling stories from Thomas, my imagination, running wild in the dead of night. It had to be. There was no thing in that water. No gaze. It was just a feeling, a primal fear triggered by the unknown. But the chill remained, not just on my hand but deep in my bones. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your soul, a premonition of something truly wrong. I forced myself to take a deep, shaky breath, then another. I had to get out of here. This wasn't the way to solve anything. Standing alone in the dark, staring into a pit of black water, was only going to drive me insane. I retreated, not running but walking with a hurried, determined pace, my eyes darting into every shadow, convinced I was being followed. The short walk back to the motel felt like an eternity. I locked the door behind me, double-checked it, then drew the curtains tight. The artificial glow of the motel room lights was a poor substitute for the sun, but it was light, and that was all that mattered. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, every creak and groan of the old building sounding like a footstep, every rustle outside like a whisper. Sleep predictably never came. By the time the first rays of dawn finally pierced through the gap in the curtains, painting the room in a pale, anemic light, I was exhausted, but a new resolve had hardened within me. Fear was a powerful motivator, but so was curiosity, and a stubborn refusal to be intimidated. Whatever was under that gazebo, whatever had made those men sick and disappear, whatever had driven David Miller to flee, it was something real, and I was going to find out what it was. My research needed to go deeper, beyond Thomas's anecdotes and the surface-level reports. I needed documents. I needed history. My first stop was the town hall, a stately, if somewhat aging, brick building that stood a few blocks from the town square. It smelled of old paper and disinfectant. I made my way to the planning and zoning department, hoping to find blueprints or building permits for the gazebo's construction. The clerk behind the counter, a woman named Carol with a beehive hairdo and a perpetually bored expression, barely looked up from her computer screen when I explained my request. Gazebo? That thing's decades old, honey. All those old paper records are in the archives. You'll need to talk to Susan. She gestured vaguely towards a door at the end of the corridor. She keeps track of all the historical stuff. Susan, the town archivist. It sounded promising. I found her in a cramped office, surrounded by towering stacks of dusty boxes and shelves overflowing with bound volumes. Susan was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that peered over a pair of half-moon spectacles perched on her nose. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a sensible tweed jacket despite the relatively warm weather. She was, in short, exactly what I imagined a small-town archivist to be. Gazebo, you say? She repeated, her voice surprisingly firm for someone so surrounded by the quiet hum of history. Most people come in here looking for property deeds or their great-grandparents' marriage certificates. Not many asking about the town square gazebo. She gave me a quizzical look. Why the sudden interest? I chose my words carefully, omitting the more sensational details. I'm a researcher. I'm doing a piece on small-town urban planning and the evolution of public spaces. The Willow Creek gazebo is quite iconic, and I'm interested in its original design and construction. It wasn't a lie, not entirely. Susan seemed to consider this, a faint smile playing on her lips. Well, it is iconic, I suppose. A very pretty structure. Built in '72 if I recall correctly. Let's see what we can dig up. She led me to a back room, even more cluttered than her office, where rows of metal filing cabinets stood like silent sentinels. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and a faint, almost metallic tang. She spent the next hour pulling out various folders and ledgers, her movements precise and efficient. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of the town's records, rattling off dates and names with ease. We found the original building permits, the contractor's reports, even newspaper clippings about the gazebo's dedication ceremony. It was all fairly standard, detailing the concrete foundation, the lumber used, the cost overruns, the usual hiccups of any construction project. Anything unusual about the site before construction? I asked, trying to sound casual as I sifted through a stack of faded blueprints. Any old structures, perhaps? Or unusual ground conditions? Susan paused, tapping a pen against her chin. Not that I recall specifically for the gazebo. The town square itself has always been public land, even back to the earliest settlements. It was just an open grassy area for a long, long time. Before the current town hall was built in the early 1900s, there was a smaller building, a general store, and before that, just open land. Nothing major. Oh wait. She rummaged through a particularly thick, leather-bound ledger, its pages brittle with age. Here we are. Town Council meeting minutes, 1971. Ah yes, there was a small issue during the initial groundbreaking for the gazebo. Nothing major, mind you. Just a delay. My heart gave a little jump. A delay? What kind of delay? It says here. Susan squinted at the faded ink. Unforeseen subterranean obstruction encountered during excavation. Required additional time and resources for removal. And then a note about unusual soil composition and unexpected water seepage. She looked up at me, a flicker of something in her eyes I couldn't quite decipher. They just called it an obstruction. Didn't specify what it was. The contractor, a Mr. Peterson, was apparently quite frustrated about it. Caused a significant cost increase, too. Unforeseen subterranean obstruction. I repeated, the words echoing in my mind. Unusual soil composition. Unexpected water seepage. It sounded exactly like what Thomas had described. The problems during the current renovation. And the pit of water. Did they ever say what the obstruction was? I pressed, leaning closer. Susan shook her head. Not in these records. Just that it was removed and construction proceeded. It was a minor footnote, really. Most of the discussion was about the cost overruns and whether to use local timber or import it. She chuckled softly. Small town politics, you know. But it wasn't a minor footnote to me. It was a glaring, flashing red light. An obstruction that caused significant delays and cost increases, yet was never specified. And it happened on the exact spot where the gazebo was being built, the exact spot where the current renovations were hitting similar issues. This wasn't just old ground. This was ground that had been troubled from the start. I spent another hour poring over the documents, but found no further mention of the obstruction. It was as if the town council and the contractors had collectively decided to erase it from history once it was dealt with. But the questions piled up in my mind. What was it? Why was it so difficult to remove? And why the unusual soil composition and unexpected water seepage? Phrases that seemed to dance around a more unsettling truth. As I thanked Susan and prepared to leave, a thought struck me. What about the architect? David Miller. Did he work on the original gazebo, or just the more recent proposals? Susan paused, her expression clouding slightly. David? Oh, David was involved with the recent proposals, yes. He was a very talented young man. Very detail-oriented. But the original design? No, that was a firm out of the city. Peterson and Sons, I believe. David just came in for the renovation plans. She paused again, her gaze distant. He seemed very particular about the foundation work, if I recall. Asked a lot of questions about the original construction. More than most architects would, I thought. Did he ever mention anything specific? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She frowned, shaking her head slowly. Not to me directly, but I remember overhearing him talking to Mayor Thompson once. He was very agitated. Something about structural integrity and unstable ground conditions. And then he just left. Dropped the project. No explanation. Most unusual. He was so keen on it at first. Did he say anything about what he found? He didn't say it, Susan replied, her voice dropping to a near whisper. But I remember the look on his face. He looked terrified, like he'd seen a ghost. And he kept talking about how they shouldn't disturb it. Let sleeping dogs lie, he said. Some things are better left buried. She shivered faintly, despite the warmth of the room. I thought he was just being dramatic. Architects can be temperamental, you know. But now, with what happened to those other men? Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw a genuine fear reflected there. What did he mean? Disturb it? I pressed, my mind racing. Disturb what? Susan shook her head again, her gaze now fixed on some unseen point beyond me. I don't know. He never said. He just packed up his office and was gone within a week. Moved out of town, I heard. Never looked back. I left the town hall with a stack of photocopies and a mind buzzing with new terrifying possibilities. The unforeseen subterranean obstruction. David Miller's fear. His warning. Let sleeping dogs lie. Some things are better left buried. It wasn't just poor soil or water seepage. It was something else. Something they'd hit during the original construction. Something they tried to bury and forget. And now whoever or whatever Thomas Redding had disturbed, the very thing that had made those men sick and vanish, the thing that had terrified David Miller into fleeing, was stirring once more. And it was no longer just aware of my presence. It was actively being disturbed. And I had just given it another reason to awaken. My next step was clear. I needed to find David Miller. He was the only one who could tell me what it was. The only one who knew what lay beneath the gazebo, waiting. But as I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, a cold dread settled over me. What if finding David Miller only led me deeper into the darkness? What if he was already too far gone? Or what if, by seeking him out, I was simply leading it directly to him and to myself? The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The game was no longer about curiosity. It was about survival. The game was no longer about curiosity. It was about survival. My mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of David's desperate plea, and the chilling implications of the gazebo's secret. Where would David go? He was a creature of habit, meticulous even in his chaos. The first, most logical place was his apartment. But if it was watching, if it was truly as pervasive as David's message suggested, then every move was a risk. The night air was a cold slap, cutting through the thin jacket I'd thrown on. The streets of Oakhaven, usually so quaint and comforting, now felt like a labyrinth of watchful shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every distant dog bark was amplified, twisting into something sinister. I kept to the back roads, avoiding the main thoroughfares, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Paranoia was a suffocating blanket, but after David's warning, I knew it wasn't just paranoia. David's apartment building was an old brick monstrosity on the edge of town, 3 stories of worn-out charm and peeling paint. He'd always said it felt like a relic, a piece of Oakhaven's forgotten past. Tonight it felt like a tomb. Most of the windows were dark, save for the flickering blue glow of a television screen in one ground floor unit. I knew that was Frank, the building's superintendent, a man whose gruff demeanor was legendary. I hesitated at the entrance, a wave of cold dread washing over me. What if David wasn't even here? What if it had already found him, or worse, was waiting inside? Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I pushed open the heavy glass door. The lobby was dim, smelling faintly of stale cigarettes and damp plaster. I could hear the faint murmur of Frank's TV from his apartment unit just off the lobby. I knocked. A pause, then the TV volume dipped. Footsteps shuffled towards the door, and it creaked open a sliver, revealing Frank's wary face, framed by a shock of unkempt gray hair. His eyes, usually clouded with indifference, now held a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Suspicion, perhaps, or even a hint of fear. "Frank," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's me, Alex. I'm looking for David Miller. Is he around?" Frank's eyes narrowed, sweeping over me as if trying to discern my intentions. "Miller," he grunted, his voice a gravelly rasp. "That kid's long gone. Vanished like a puff of smoke weeks ago. Didn't even bother to pay last month's rent. Left a mess too. Weeks ago." My stomach lurched. David's message had been recent, just a day or 2 ago. Had he been gone longer than I realized, only to resurface with that cryptic plea? Did he say where he was going? Leave any forwarding address? Frank scoffed, pushing the door open a little wider, revealing the cluttered, dimly lit interior of his own apartment. "Nah, just up and left. Said he needed to get out of Oakhaven. Said he was being watched." Frank leaned in conspiratorially, his voice dropping to a low, unsettling whisper. "He was talking crazy, Alex. Rambling about whispers, shadows, something under the gazebo in the town square. Said someone was after him, trying to silence him." My blood ran cold. David hadn't been rambling. He'd been telling the truth. Did he seem scared? Frank snorted. Scared? He was terrified, always looking over his shoulder, jumping at every sound. Said he saw things that weren't there. Or maybe they were. Frank rubbed his chin, his gaze distant, as if remembering something unsettling. "The last time I saw him, he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were wide, bloodshot. He kept muttering about the old families and the pact. Sounded like something out of a horror movie." "The old families?" I pressed, my heart pounding. "Did he mention any names?" Frank shook his head. "Just them. Said they were everywhere, watching. Said the secret was buried deep, and they'd kill to keep it that way." He paused, then added, "He was packing a small bag. Said he had to go somewhere safe, somewhere it couldn't find him. But he also said he had to leave something behind. Something important. In his apartment." My breath hitched. "His apartment? Is it still empty?" "Yeah, mostly cleared it out myself," Frank said, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "But I haven't changed the locks yet. Been meaning to get around to it. Too much other stuff to do." He gestured vaguely at his cluttered apartment. "Why? You think he left something for you?" "Maybe," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice was tight. "We were old friends. He might have wanted me to have something." Frank gave a non-committal grunt. "Whatever. Just don't make a mess. And don't break anything. I don't need more trouble." He turned, heading back into his apartment, leaving the door ajar. "I'm going back to my show. Just be careful, Alex. That kid wasn't right at the end. My pulse hammered. Frank's words were a mixture of relief and renewed terror. David had left something, and he genuinely believed he was being watched. I waited until I heard the TV volume rise again, then slipped silently up the creaking stairs. David's apartment was on the 3rd floor. The hallway was dark, the only light filtering in from a grimy window at the far end. I found his door, number 3B, and tried the knob. Unlocked. A shiver ran down my spine. Frank hadn't been lying. I pushed the door open slowly. The apartment was a shell. The furniture was gone, leaving faint indentations on the dusty carpet. The walls were bare, save for lighter squares where paintings once hung. The air was cold, stale, and held a peculiar scent. Not exactly musty, but something metallic, almost like old pennies or dried blood, mixed with a faint, cloying sweetness. I pulled out my phone, using its flashlight to cut through the gloom. My gaze swept the empty rooms, searching for anything out of place. David's meticulous nature, even in panic, might have left a clue in plain sight, or perhaps expertly hidden. I checked under the edges of the baseboards behind the radiator, inside the empty kitchen cabinets. Nothing. Just dust and echoes. Then I noticed it. A faint discoloration on the floorboards in the living room, near where his old armchair used to sit. It was a subtle ring, as if something heavy had been placed there for a long time, slightly darker than the surrounding wood. I knelt, running my fingers over the spot. The boards felt slightly looser here. My heart began to pound with a frantic rhythm. I dug my fingernails into the seam, trying to pry up the board. It resisted, but with a grunt of effort it finally came free. Beneath it, nestled in the dark cavity, was a small leather-bound journal. It was old, worn smooth at the edges, and secured with a tarnished brass clasp. This was it. This was what David had left behind. My hands trembled as I carefully lifted the journal out. The leather felt cold, almost clammy against my skin. I clicked open the clasp. Inside, David's frantic, familiar handwriting filled page after page. His entries were dated, starting months ago, detailing his initial curiosity about the town's history, then slowly descending into a chilling account of paranoia and discovery. Entry: October 12th. The gazebo. Always the gazebo. I keep finding old photos, postcards. It's always there. A constant. But there's something unsettling about it. An energy. Almost hungry. Entry: November 5th. I've been researching the town's founding. It's all very neat, very clean. Too clean. But digging into the archives at the old library, I found whispers. Mentions of a founding pact. A secret society among the original families. The Thorne family name keeps reappearing. They owned the land where the gazebo now stands. Entry: November 28th. The whisper started after I visited the old Thorne estate, now a derelict ruin on the edge of town. Not actual voices, not at first. More like a pressure in my ears, a cold dread that follows me. I feel watched. Always watched. Entry: December 10th. It's real. The shadows, the cold. I see them in the periphery. They move. They're not human. They want something. They don't want me to uncover the truth. The gazebo isn't just a structure. It's a focal point. A gateway. Or a cage. Entry: December 21st. I found it. A hidden passage, an old design within the gazebo's original blueprint. Not in the public records, but in a private collection I managed to access. A chamber beneath. And a symbol. A coiled serpent eating its own tail, but with 7 eyes. I saw that symbol in the Thorne family's crest, too. It's everywhere now. I can't unsee it. My breath hitched. A chamber beneath the gazebo. The symbol. It was all real. Entry: January 3 RD. They know I know. The whispers are louder. I hear my name. I see figures in the dark. They are trying to stop me. I have to leave something behind. A breadcrumb. Someone has to finish this. The truth about Oakhaven, about it, has to come out. The Thorne family, they guard something ancient, terrible. A responsibility passed down through generations. They made a pact. With it. Entry: January 15th. I found a way to encrypt a message. A final clue. It's hidden in the Oakhaven Historical Society archives. Look for the ledger. Estate of Thorne, 1888. Page 73. The riddle will lead you to the next step. But be careful, Alex. They are closing in. If you're reading this, I'm probably already gone. Don't trust anyone. Don't go to the gazebo alone. And whatever you do, don't let it catch you. The last entry was dated just 2 days ago. David had been here writing this just before he sent that message. He knew he was leaving. He knew he was in danger. A sudden sharp creak from the hallway outside the apartment sent a jolt of pure terror through me. My head snapped up, my eyes darting towards the open door. Had someone heard me? Was it here? I held my breath, straining to listen. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Then a faint, almost imperceptible whisper brushed against my ear. So close it felt like someone was standing right behind me. A cold breath on my neck. I spun around, the journal clutched tight in my hands, but there was nothing. Just the empty, dusty room. My heart was a frantic drum solo against my ribs. It wasn't just David's paranoia. It was real. It was here. I had to get out. Now. I quickly tucked the journal into my jacket, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I moved as quietly as possible, my senses on high alert, every nerve screaming. I slipped out of the apartment, pulling the door shut behind me with a soft click. The hallway was still dark, still silent, but the oppressive feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I felt eyes on me, pressing in from the shadows, from the very walls. I practically flew down the stairs, my feet barely touching the worn carpet. I didn't dare look back. I burst through the lobby door, not caring if Frank heard me, and into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I had put several blocks between myself and David's apartment building, my lungs burning, my mind a whirlwind of fear and revelation. The Oakhaven Historical Society archives. The ledger. Estate of Thorne, 1888. Page 73. A riddle. David had given me a path. A desperate trail of breadcrumbs leading deeper into Oakhaven's dark heart. But he had also warned me, don't go to the gazebo alone. Don't let it catch you. The game was no longer about survival alone. It was about uncovering a truth so ancient and terrible. It had consumed my friend. And now it was coming for me. The world spun, not with the dizzying rush of panic, but with the slow, deliberate turning of a gear in a monstrous machine. Michael was gone. Not just missing, but taken. And his last message, scrawled in desperation, confirmed my deepest fears while simultaneously igniting a terrifying realization. This wasn't a game. This wasn't some elaborate prank. This was a hunt, and I was the new prey. Don't go to the gazebo alone. Don't let it catch you. The words echoed in my mind, a chilling mantra. What was it? Person? A group? Or something far more ancient and sinister? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of my apartment. Sleep was an impossibility, eating a distant memory. All I could feel was the icy grip of dread, and a burgeoning desperate need for answers. Michael had gone too deep, and whatever he'd found, whatever had consumed him, was now a shadow stretching towards me. I tried to rationalize, to dismiss it as a nightmare, but the lingering scent of damp earth and old paper on Michael's note was too real. The memory of his frantic eyes, the way he'd been acting for weeks, it all clicked into place with a sickening finality. He hadn't been paranoid. He'd been aware. The first logical step, the one any sane person would take, was to go to the police. But even as the thought formed, it dissolved. What would I say? My friend Michael Miller has vanished, and he left a note telling me not to go near the town gazebo because it will catch me? They probably suggest I get some rest, maybe a referral to a therapist. I could almost hear Chief Thompson's condescending chuckle. No, the authorities wouldn't help. They were part of the town, part of the fabric that seemed to be actively concealing something. My only hope lay in Michael. He wouldn't have just vanished without a trace. Not without leaving a breadcrumb trail for someone he trusted. He was meticulous, a researcher at heart. He must have left something behind. His apartment. That was the only place. The thought of going to his place filled me with a fresh wave of anxiety. What if it was waiting? What if it had already cleaned out everything? But I couldn't just sit here waiting for it to find me. I had to move. I had to act. Under the cloak of pre-dawn darkness, I made my way to Michael's apartment. It was a nondescript building on the edge of town, one he'd chosen for its quiet anonymity. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows, making every rustle of leaves sound like footsteps, every distant car engine an approaching threat. My breath hitched in my throat with every creak of the old wooden stairs as I ascended to his floor. His door was locked naturally, but Michael, ever the pragmatist, had shown me a trick once. A loose panel above the doorframe where he kept a spare key. My fingers fumbled, cold and clumsy, until they closed around the familiar cold metal. The click of the lock seemed deafening in the silence. The apartment was eerily still. A faint metallic smell hung in the air. Not unpleasant, but unfamiliar. Everything seemed untouched, yet wrong. His neatly stacked books were askew. A coffee cup sat half full on his desk, a pen lying beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. It looked like he'd simply stepped out for a moment, but the air of abandonment was palpable. I moved cautiously, my senses on high alert. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture. But a thin layer of dust covered everything, suggesting he hadn't been here for at least a few days, possibly longer. And then I noticed it. A faint smear on the polished wooden floor near his desk. It was dark, almost black, and when I touched it, it felt sticky like dried sap. My stomach churned. It wasn't blood, but it definitely wasn't normal. My eyes scanned the room, searching for anything out of place. Michael was a creature of habit, and his apartment usually reflected that meticulous order. But something was off about his bookshelf. One section, filled with dusty tomes on local history and folklore, seemed too neat, too perfectly aligned. Michael always had a few books half pulled out, marked with sticky notes. This looked staged. My fingers traced the spines, a cold dread washing over me. And then I found it. Hidden behind a particularly thick volume titled Legends of Willow Creek was a small, almost imperceptible button. It wasn't wired to anything, but a gentle press revealed a false back to the shelf, swinging inward with a soft click. Inside, nestled amongst a few old photographs and a childhood drawing, was a worn leather-bound journal. Michael's journal. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. This was it. This was where the answers lay. I retreated to Michael's armchair, the journal clutched tightly in my hands. The first few pages were innocuous, observations about local bird migrations, notes on a new coffee bean he was trying. But as I flipped further, the entries grew darker, more frantic. His handwriting, usually so precise, became jagged, almost illegible in places. October 17th, the Gazebo. It's more than just an old bandstand. The original blueprints, if they ever existed, seem to have vanished from the town archives. Odd considering its age. Local historian, old Mrs. Henderson, mentioned it was built on ancient grounds. Dismissed it as local charm, but something about her eyes. November 3 RD. Found an old map, buried in a dusty box at the Historical Society. Not a town map, but a survey of the land before Willow Creek was officially founded. The area where the gazebo now stands is marked with a peculiar symbol. Looks like a root system? Or veins? And beneath it, a word almost faded. The heart. November 20. The dreams are starting. Not nightmares exactly. More like suggestions. Images of tangled wood, of whispers from the earth. I feel drawn to the gazebo, especially at night. A pull like a tide. My breath caught in my throat. The heart. Michael had mentioned it on his note. This was it. This was the connection. December 5. I've been researching the town's founding families. The Ashworths, the Blackwoods, the Carters. All prominent. All with deep roots in Willow Creek. And all, strangely, seem to have had an ancestor involved in the original construction of the gazebo. No records, no official documentation of their involvement. Just whispers, old letters, veiled references in tattered diaries. They guard something. I feel it. December 12. I think it sees me. Or feels me. The air around the gazebo changes when I'm near. Pressure. A hum. It's not just a structure. It's alive. And what's beneath it? I think it's been there for centuries, perhaps millennia. The legends aren't just stories. They're warnings. The journal entries became a terrifying descent into Michael's obsession. His growing certainty that something ancient and malevolent resided beneath our seemingly idyllic town. He wrote about cryptic symbols he found carved into old tombstones in the oldest part of the cemetery, symbols that mirrored the one on the ancient land survey. He mentioned hushed conversations he overheard in the town square, fragments of sentences about the vigil and keeping it dormant. January 18. I finally found it. An old church ledger, hidden in the archives of the First Church of Willow Creek. Not official records, but a personal diary kept by Reverend Elijah Vance, one of the town's earliest spiritual leaders. He wrote about a pact. A sacrifice. To appease the root. He described it as a vast sentient network feeding on something. And the gazebo? Not a bandstand.
À astérisque conduit astérisque.
A seal. A conduit. A seal. The words chilled me to the bone. The cheerful gazebo, the heart of our town square, was a prison. Or worse, a feeding tube. January 15th. The Ashworths. I confronted Elias Ashworth subtly about the old legends. His face went pale. He immediately changed the subject too quickly, too vehemently. He knows. His family knows. They all do. They're part of the vigil. They protect it. They feed it. Michael's paranoia wasn't paranoia at all. It was insight. He had uncovered a conspiracy woven into the very fabric of Willow Creek. A secret held by generations of its most prominent families. They weren't just town elders. They were guardians, perhaps even cultists. January 22 ND. I made a mistake. I got too close. I tried to access the old tunnel system, the one that supposedly runs beneath the square. It's not just a legend. It's real. I saw something. A flicker in the darkness. Not a person. Not an animal. Something different. Sensed me. Felt me. And now it's coming. The last entry was dated just 2 days ago. The handwriting was almost unintelligible, scrawled in a desperate hurry. January 24th. They know I know. The vigil. They're closing in. The gazebo, it's waking up. The hum is louder. The dreams are clearer. It wants out. It wants to feed. And it knows I'm trying to stop it. Don't go to the gazebo alone. Don't let it catch you. The heart. It's beating again. Find the key. The key to the seal. It's in the old plans. The original ones. Vance hid them. He hid them away from the vigil. Before it takes everything. Before it takes me. Before it takes me. The words hung in the air. A phantom whisper. Michael had been trying to warn me, to arm me with the knowledge he'd sacrificed everything for. He'd found the truth, and it had cost him his life or something worse. I closed the journal, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The metallic smell in the apartment suddenly seemed more sinister, like the scent of old iron in something organic. The silence pressed in on me, no longer comforting but menacing. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every creak of the old building sounded like a footstep. The key to the seal. The old plans. Vance hid them. Where? And how could I find them when the entire town, or at least its most powerful families, were actively trying to suppress this truth? A faint scratching sound came from the window. My head snapped up. It sounded like brittle branches dragging across the glass. But Michael's apartment was on the 3rd floor with no trees nearby. My heart leaped into my throat. The scratching came again, louder this time, more insistent. It wasn't branches. It was a rhythmic tapping like long thin fingers against the pane. And then a shadow, impossibly long and spindly, stretched across the glass, momentarily obscuring the faint glow of the streetlights. It was too tall, too thin, too wrong to be human. It knew I was here. It had found me. My world constricted, my breath a strangled gasp in the sudden, suffocating silence. My muscles locked, a primal response to the impossible horror. That shadow, it wasn't a trick of light. It was a presence, cold and malevolent, and it had seen me. Its awareness was a physical weight pressing down, crushing the air from my lungs. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. My eyes, wide and unblinking, were glued to the window. The shadow was gone, dissolved back into the oppressive darkness, but its impossible form lingered, a phantom afterimage. The faint streetlights outside seemed to dim further, their yellow glow struggling against the encroaching gloom. The old house creaked, not with familiar settling, but with a new unsettling groan, as if the very structure held its breath. My heart hammered against my ribs. It knew I was here. That thought, cold and sharp as ice, finally broke through the paralysis. I had to move. Now. I scrambled backward, tripping over the rug, my hands flailing against an armchair. The clumsy fall echoed eerily. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Just the wind, a low, mournful sigh that seemed to carry a whisper of my name. My gaze darted around the room. The front door was too exposed. The back door led to an overgrown yard, a labyrinth of shadows. But staying felt like waiting for a predator. Adrenaline coursed through me, replacing terror with a desperate need to survive. I grabbed the heavy brass poker from the fireplace, its weight surprisingly comforting. It was nothing against that, but it was something. I crept towards the back, each step a deliberate effort to be silent. The floorboards groaned beneath me. I imagined those impossibly long, spindly fingers scraping against the outside walls, counting my steps. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the moon through a grimy window. I fumbled for the light switch, then hesitated. Light would only make me a target. Reaching the back door, my hand trembled as I grappled with the old deadbolt. It was stiff, protesting. My breath hitched. I heard it now. A faint rustling from the backyard, like dry leaves, but too deliberate, too rhythmic. It was getting closer. With a desperate grunt, I twisted the bolt. It gave way with a loud clunk. I winked. The doorknob was cold. I pulled it open, a crack peering out. The world outside was still, eerily so. The tall grass swayed. The old shed cast a long shadow. Nothing. But the rustling persisted from the far corner of the yard, near the hedges. A flicker of movement. Not the shadow from the window, but something smaller, closer to the ground, yet too fast, too fluid. It was scouting, circling the house, almost as if looking for me. Panic threatened, but I forced it down. I couldn't outrun that. I needed a place to hide, somewhere I could think. The Historical Society building. Small, tucked away, and I still had the key. A long shot, but my only shot at answers or temporary reprieve. I needed to get to Main Street. Sprinting across the backyard, I vaulted the low fence, landing silently. I kept to the darkest patches, my breath ragged. The rustling seemed to follow, a relentless whisper just behind me, always out of sight. I felt its presence, a cold dread clinging to my skin, sucking warmth from the air, sound from the night. The town felt utterly dead. Reaching the alley parallel to Main Street, I paused, pressing against an old bakery wall. Main Street was deserted, streetlights casting lonely shadows. The gazebo, a silent sentinel, stood in the square's center, a beacon of the mystery. I had to cross it. Exposed. No other way. Taking a deep breath, I bolted. My feet slapped the pavement, each sound amplified. I ran, gaze fixed on the Historical Society building. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the gazebo. A shimmer, a distortion of moonlight, like heat haze but cold. I didn't dare look directly. I just ran. As I neared the square's edge, a sudden piercing shriek tore through the night. Not human. Pure agony and rage scraping against reality, echoing in my bones. I stumbled, my head snapping towards the gazebo. Standing beneath its ornate dome, silhouetted against the faint streetlights, was it? Taller than any human, impossibly thin, limbs elongated, spindly, ending in razor-sharp blades. Its head was small, shrunken, but I felt its gaze, a malevolent, ancient intelligence. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was a being, a nightmare made flesh, shimmering with an unholy light that absorbed darkness. Its mouth, a jagged tear, opened again. Another shriek, more ear-splitting, ripped from its throat, directed at me. Pure, focused hatred. Started to move. Not running but gliding, a seamless, unnatural motion across the grass, faster than anything I'd ever seen. It covered the distance in a terrifying second. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound, pushing myself harder towards the Historical Society. I heard it behind me, a soft scraping sound, impossibly close. The air grew colder, thick with ozone and something ancient, putrid. My hand fumbled for the doorknob, fingers clumsy. The key. I dug frantically into my pocket. My vision blurred. The scraping sound was right behind me. I felt its frigid presence on my neck. I jammed the key into the lock, twisting. The ancient lock groaned, then clicked. I threw open the door and fell inside, slamming it shut, fumbling with the deadbolt. A sickening thud reverberated through the door, followed by a low guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards. It was outside, trying to get in. I leaned against the door, panting. The building was dark, filled with the musty smell of old paper. I was safe for now, but the growling persisted, relentless. My mind reeled. What was that thing? It shouldn't exist. Yet it was real, and it was after me. I stumbled through the dark hallway, clutching the poker. I needed light. Answers. I found the main research room, flicking on the weak overhead light. Papers, maps, photos, all my evidence. My eyes fell on the worn leather-bound journal of Elias Thorne, a founding father who oversaw the gazebo's construction. I remembered cryptic entries. I snatched it up, flipping through pages. The growling outside intensified, punctuated by sharp scrapes against the walls. I ignored it, scanning. I found the entry. October 27, 1888. The work proceeds slowly. The stone it resists. A chill permeates the earth beneath the chosen spot. Laborers complain of nightmares, whispers. I have seen it too, a fleeting shadow unnaturally tall. They call it the Old One, a spirit angered by intrusion. Foolish superstition, I tell them, but a cold dread settles in my own heart. We build upon something ancient, something that does not wish to be disturbed. The foundation, it must be secured, sealed, forever. My blood ran cold. The Old One, angered by intrusion. The gazebo's completion year. I read another entry, November 4th, 1888. It is done. The gazebo stands. But the cost? Oh, the cost. We thought to appease it, to build over it, to seal it away. But it is not so easily contained. One of the men, poor Thomas, he vanished last night. No trace. Others whisper of the Old One's hunger. I fear we have only angered it. We have built a cage, yes, but also a monument to our folly. It watches. It waits. And sometimes it stirs. The journal clattered to the floor. My eyes darted to the window, then the door. The growling outside had changed. Deeper, resonating with ancient, inhuman intelligence. A sound of discovery, of recognition. It wasn't just around the building anymore. It was at the building. And it knew I was inside. This thing, this Old One, was connected to the gazebo, to the spot I'd started digging. I had disturbed it. The thudding against the door became more forceful. The wood groaning, splintering. It wouldn't hold. I had found my answers, terrifying as they were. I hadn't just uncovered a secret. I had awakened a horror. And now I was its next target. I had to find a way out. My gaze fell on a dusty map. A hand-drawn blueprint of the town, late 1800s. I scanned it frantically. A faint, almost invisible dotted line led from the Historical Society building, passing under Main Street, and ending precisely at the town square gazebo. A tunnel. A forgotten secret tunnel. Could it be a desperate escape route built by Thorn? Or a path to the Old One? The door shuddered violently, a loud crack. The creature was breaking in. Precious seconds. I had to take the chance. Face whatever was at the door, or venture into the unknown depths of a century-old secret passage, leading directly to the heart of the mystery, and perhaps to the very thing that hunted me. The decision was made in a split second, driven by a primal instinct for survival and an insatiable need to understand. The thudding and splintering at the front door grew louder, more insistent, signaling that whoever was out there was nearly through. There was no time to hesitate. I plunged into the inky blackness of the secret passage, fumbling behind me to pull the heavy carved panel shut. A soft click echoed, then blessed silence, save for the frantic pounding of my own heart against my ribs. The air immediately grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, ancient stone, and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. I pulled out my phone, its weak flashlight beam cutting a pathetic swathe through the oppressive darkness. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders, and the rough-hewn stone walls pressed in on me from all sides. I started to descend, the steps uneven and slick under my feet, each creak of my shoes amplified in the suffocating quiet. My breath hitched in my throat. What was I doing? Had I just sealed myself into a tomb? The thought was chilling, but the alternative, facing an unknown, violent intruder in Eleanor's house, felt even worse. I kept moving, one hand tracing the cold, rough wall, the other holding the phone steady, its light revealing only a few feet ahead at a time. The passage twisted and turned, a labyrinthine descent into the unknown. I could feel cobwebs brushing against my face, and the occasional scuttling sound in the periphery made my skin crawl. This place had been untouched for a very long time. After what felt like an eternity, the passage widened slightly into a small, irregular alcove. My phone beam caught something glinting faintly in a niche carved into the stone. It was a tarnished silver locket, suspended from a delicate chain. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. As I pulled it free, a small leather-bound journal tumbled from behind it, landing with a soft thud on the damp ground. The journal. Eleanor Vance's journal. My heart leaped. This had to be it. This had to be the key. I knelt, ignoring the chill seeping into my knees, and carefully opened the journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with elegant, looping script in faded ink. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's. I scanned the first few pages, a frantic urgency overriding my need for careful perusal. The early entries were mundane. observations about town life, reflections on her garden. But then the tone shifted. The dates became irregular, sometimes years apart, sometimes only days. The words grew more desperate, hinting at a hidden burden. August 12, 1968. The weight of this knowledge grows heavier with each passing year. Robert doesn't understand the true nature of our family's legacy. He sees only superstition, but I feel it, the stirring beneath our feet. The tremors are becoming more frequent. We must reinforce the seals. Seals? What seals? And what was stirring? My mind raced, connecting this to the gazebo, the tremors Jessica had mentioned, the strange incidents. I flipped forward, my fingers smudging the ancient ink. October 3rd, 1975. The council meeting today was a farce. Benjamin Harding and Clara Thorne scoffed at my warnings. They speak of modernizing the square, of removing antiquated structures. They have no idea what they toy with. The gazebo is not merely a monument, it is a linchpin, a containment. To remove it would be to unleash something unspeakable. Benjamin Harding, Clara Thorne. The names echoed in my mind. These were the figures Jessica had mentioned, the powerful families who seemed to pull the strings in Havenwood. They were involved. But why would they want to remove a containment? Unless they didn't know its true purpose, or worse, they did. I continued to read, my breath catching in my throat. Eleanor's entries became more fragmented, more frantic, especially in the later pages. April 20th, 1992. The whispers have begun again. The dreams are more vivid. Calls to me trying to breach the barrier. I found the ancient texts, hidden in the library's restricted section. The shadow of Havenwood. They speak of a ritual, a sacrifice to bind the entity. My ancestors performed it. They sacrificed their own to keep the town safe. Am I next? Sacrifice. Entity. The shadow of Havenwood. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a local legend. It was a terrifying reality that Eleanor had been living with her entire life. This was the true secret under the town square. Not treasure, not a hidden society, but a malevolent presence sealed away. July 1st, 2003. Emily, she found the old maps. She's too curious, too bright for her own good. I tried to warn her subtly. The curiosity can be a curse. The gazebo is weakening. I feel its pulse, a low thrumming beneath the earth. The energy is shifting. Emily. My Emily. She had been searching for something connected to the gazebo, hadn't she? Was this what she was looking for? Had Eleanor tried to protect her, just as she had tried to protect me? The entries grew darker, more desperate. January 15, 2018. They are actively trying to dismantle the seal. Benjamin and Clara, and now their descendants Thomas and Sarah, are pushing for the restoration project. They believe they can harness its power. They are fools. The texts warn, he who seeks to control the shadow becomes the shadow. They will unleash it upon us all. Thomas, Sarah, the mayor's secretary, the town council member. They were all connected. They weren't just influential. They were actively trying to remove the seal, whether out of greed, ignorance, or a twisted desire for power. And Eleanor knew it. She was trying to stop them. March 5th, 2023. The tremors are constant now. The ground beneath the square groans. I heard it last night, a low guttural sound, like a beast waking from a millennium-long slumber. It's close. So close. I've reinforced the warding symbols, but they are not enough. It needs a stronger bind. A sacrifice. But who, or what can contain it now? Eleanor's last entry, dated just days before her murder. This was it. The seal was failing. The thing was waking up. And someone had killed Eleanor to get to it, or to stop her from preventing its release. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. The entire town was built on a lie. A precarious balance maintained by generations of Eleanor's family, guarding a terrifying secret. And now ambitious, power-hungry individuals were actively trying to break that seal, to harness a darkness that would consume them all. The passage continued, dipping even lower, the air growing colder, heavier. The metallic scent intensified, now mixed with something else, something fetid and ancient, like earth disturbed from a very deep grave. I could hear a faint rhythmic thump-thump-thump from somewhere far below. a sound that vibrated through the very stone beneath my feet. It wasn't the sound of construction. It was deeper, more organic, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. My phone battery indicator flashed red, a terrifying warning. I had to move, and fast. The passage opened into a wider circular chamber, the walls here not rough stone, but smoothly carved, covered in strange, intricate symbols that pulsed faintly with a dull, reddish light. In the center of the chamber, directly below what I now realized was the town square gazebo, was a massive circular stone slab. It looked like an altar or perhaps a lid, and on the surface of that slab, the reddish light was strongest, emanating from a network of glowing cracks, like spiderwebs spreading across its ancient face. The thump-thump-thump was louder here, resonating through my bones. It was coming from under the slab. As my phone light flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness, I heard it clearly. A low, guttural growl, deep and primal, echoing from beneath the stone, followed by a sickening scrape, as if something massive was trying to push its way out. Then from the darkness just beyond the glowing slab, a voice, raspy and dry as old bone, spoke my name. Michael. The voice. My name. Spoken from the darkness. A sound so ancient it felt like it had been carved from the very rock around us. Every nerve ending in my body screamed. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror, reflecting the eerie glow of the slab. Who are you? I stammered, my voice a pathetic squeak against the cavern's oppressive silence. My flashlight beam trembled, piercing the gloom where the voice had originated. There was nothing there, just more rough-hewn stone disappearing into shadow. You know me, Michael, the voice rasped again, softer this time but no less chilling. You always have. You just forgot. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, dripping with an intimacy that turned my blood to ice. How could it know me? I had never been here before, never heard this voice. Yet, a faint, unsettling echo stirred in the deepest corners of my memory, like a half-forgotten dream. No, I whispered, shaking my head. I don't know you. Oh, but you do. You carry the mark. The blood. The voice chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that seemed to scrape against the very air. Just like your father. And his father before him. The keepers. The guardians. My father. He was a quiet, unassuming man, a high school history teacher. He never spoke of anything like this. My grandfather, a stern farmer, even less so. What was it talking about? Keepers? Guardians? What are you talking about? Sarah interjected, her voice trembling but surprisingly firm. What mark? What blood? The voice ignored her, its focus solely on me. The mark of the oath, Michael. The oath sworn by your ancestors to protect what lies beneath. To ensure it never awakens fully. To keep the town safe from its own ambition. A new wave of dread washed over me. This wasn't just some random entity. It knew my lineage, my family. It spoke of an oath. An oath my family supposedly took. An oath I knew nothing about. What is under the slab? I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. My gaze flickered to the glowing stone, then back to the darkness. The guttural groans and shrieks from earlier had subsided, replaced by an unnerving stillness, broken only by the voice. A consequence, the voice replied, a hint of something that might have been sorrow, or perhaps mockery in its tone. A consequence of greed, a forbidden knowledge, of a pact broken. A pact, Sarah repeated, stepping closer to me, her hand finding mine, a small comfort in the growing terror. Long ago, before this town was even a whisper on the wind, there was another settlement here. The voice began, its tone shifting, becoming a storyteller's cadence, ancient and compelling. They were not like the others. They sought power, not peace. They delved into the earth, not for sustenance but for secrets. They found something, Michael. Something vast. Something hungry. My mind reeled. This wasn't just a local legend anymore. This was a deep, dark history, interwoven with my own family. The town's supposed founder, Elias Thorne, who built the gazebo. Was he part of this? Was he the one who found something? They made a pact, the voice continued, ignoring my unspoken questions. To control it, to harness its power. But power once tasted is rarely satisfied. They tried to take more than was offered. They tried to command what could only be contained. A low thrumming began to emanate from the glowing slab, a deep vibration that resonated in my chest. The light from the stone intensified, casting longer, dancing shadows on the cavern walls. And it turned on them. I finished, a horrifying realization dawning on me. Oh, it didn't turn, the voice corrected, a cold amusement in its rasp. It simply was. It simply responded. The pact was broken. The town was almost consumed. But then a few wiser than the rest intervened. Your ancestors, Michael. They sacrificed much. They bound it. Not to destroy it, for it cannot be destroyed, but to contain it, to keep it dormant. And they swore an oath that their line would forever watch, forever guard, forever keep the secret. The secret under the town square gazebo, Sarah murmured, her eyes wide with comprehension. Precisely, the voice affirmed. They built the gazebo. They built the town around it. A constant vigil, a constant reminder, a constant sacrifice. Sacrifice. I choked out. What kind of sacrifice? The thrumming from the slab grew louder, more insistent. The glowing light pulsed brighter and then dimmer, like a monstrous heart beating beneath the stone. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop, a bone-chilling cold seeping into my very core. A sacrifice of truth, the voice replied, its cadence turning ominous. A sacrifice of innocence. A sacrifice of life. My blood ran cold. Life? What did it mean by life? Had my ancestors been sacrificing people to this thing? Was that why the town felt so off? Why no one ever seemed to leave? No, I whispered, shaking my head violently. My family wouldn't do that. They're good people. Good intentions pave the road to oblivion, Michael, the voice retorted, its tone now laced with a cruel edge. They did what they had to do, or what they believed they had to do, to keep the town from being swallowed whole, to keep it from tearing free. As if on cue, the sickening scrape from before returned, louder this time, more violent. It sounded like something immense, something with claws or jagged edges, dragging itself against the underside of the stone slab. The entire chamber vibrated, dust raining down from the ceiling. Sarah let out a small shriek, pressing herself against me. It's trying to get out. I breathed, my heart hammering against my ribs. It always tries, the voice affirmed, its tone almost weary now. But it has grown impatient. The bindings weaken. The oath has been forgotten by most. The sacrifices, they have become less potent. What do you mean, less potent? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper above the growing rumble. The bloodline thins, child, the voice explained, addressing her for the first time with a note of disdain. The true nature of the pact is lost. The townspeople, they believe they are safe. They believe the gazebo is just a monument. They are blind, and their blindness feeds its hunger. A sudden violent tremor shook the chamber. Cracks, thin as spiderwebs, began to snake across the ceiling. Small pebbles dislodged and clattered to the floor. The glowing slab pulsed with an alarming intensity, the light now almost blinding. Beneath it, the sounds grew more desperate, more powerful, a cacophony of groans, shrieks, and that awful grinding scrape. What are you? I demanded, my voice raw, straining to be heard over the rising chaos. Are you the thing under the slab? The voice chuckled, a sound utterly devoid of mirth. No, Michael. I am its voice, its consciousness, its memory, the part that wants to be understood, the part that remembers the pact, the part that watches. I am the whisper in the dark, the echo of what truly lies beneath. And I have been waiting for you. Waiting for me for what? I yelled, fear giving way to a desperate anger. To fulfill your duty, Michael, the voice responded, its tone hardening, growing colder, more commanding. To remember the oath, to make the ultimate sacrifice, to ensure the town's survival, or watch it burn. The ground beneath us bucked violently. A larger section of the ceiling gave way, sending a shower of debris down near us. The glowing slab began to tilt, ever so slightly, on its ancient pivot point. A new sound joined the chorus from below. A wet, tearing sound, like something ripping through flesh and stone. The air was suddenly thick with a metallic, coppery smell, sickeningly sweet. It's breaking free, Sarah screamed, pulling at my arm. Michael, we have to go. Now. But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the spot. The voice had said, ultimate sacrifice. It had said, my duty. What did that mean? Was it asking me to give my life? To feed this thing? The choice is yours, Michael, the voice boomed. its raspy quality now infused with an unholy power that reverberated through my bones. The town's fate rests on your shoulders. Will you be the one to save them? Or the one to unleash the horror they so carefully buried? The slab groaned again, a deep resonant sound, and then with a terrifying shudder it began to slide. Slowly at first, then gaining momentum, revealing a sliver of the abyssal darkness beneath. From that newly opened gap, a blinding flash of crimson light erupted, momentarily engulfing the entire chamber in a hellish glow, followed by a blast of frigid, deathly air that carried with it an unbearable stench of decay and something far, far worse. And then from the chasm that was rapidly widening, a single enormous scaled claw, glistening wetly in the crimson light, began to emerge. And then from the chasm that was rapidly widening, a single enormous scaled claw, glistening wetly in the crimson light, began to emerge. It wasn't merely large, it was titanic, each jointed digit thicker than a man's torso, ending in a talon that curved like a predatory scythe, razor-sharp and dark as obsidian. The scales covering it were a murky, iridescent green-black, like ancient oil slicked over a primeval hide, reflecting the eerie red glow in a way that seemed to drink the light rather than bounce it back. A low, guttural rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate not just the air but the very ground beneath their feet, emanated from the abyssal opening, a sound of immense effort, of something impossibly ancient stirring from a slumber too long. Jessica felt her breath hitch, her lungs refusing to draw in the stale, putrid air. Her mind, already frayed by the relentless barrage of the impossible, simply refused to process what her eyes were seeing. This wasn't a legend, not a ghost, not a trick of the light. This was a physical, terrifying entity, ripping its way into their reality. Michael, usually so composed, let out a choked cry, stumbling backward, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. David, who had prided himself on knowing every dark corner of Oakhaven's history, stood frozen, his jaw slack, his eyes wide and vacant as if witnessing the end of all things he held true. Even Emily, whose skepticism had been her shield, now trembled violently, a whimper escaping her lips as she clutched at Jessica's arm, her grip like a vice. The claw continued its slow, agonizing ascent, followed by a thick, muscled forearm, then a shoulder broader than a small car. The chasm, now a gaping maw, stretched wider, splintering the remaining foundations of the gazebo, which groaned and shrieked under the immense, unseen pressure. Dust and debris rained down, mingling with the chilling, decaying air that now pulsed with an almost palpable malevolence. Then a head emerged. It was a nightmare-given form, a reptilian visage but twisted, elongated, with eyes that glowed with an internal malevolent crimson, mirroring the light that bathed the scene. Its snout was blunt, powerful, lined with rows of irregular dagger-like teeth that gleamed wetly. Two short, stubby horns like blunt obsidian shards protruded from its brow, and its neck was a thick, ridged column of muscle and scales. It wasn't just a beast, it was something alien, something that defied biological classification, a creature born of a forgotten epoch, a horror from the deep places of the earth. A second roar, louder this time, ripped through the night, a sound of pure, unbridled power and ancient fury that tore at their eardrums, vibrating through their very bones. The ground shuddered violently, throwing them off balance. The gazebo, already compromised, began to give way definitively. Timbers snapped with the sound of gunshots, the roof tilting precariously, threatening to collapse into the growing abyss. "Run!" Michael finally managed to scream, his voice raw with terror, snapping himself out of his paralysis. "Get out of here!" But where? The creature was still emerging, its massive body slowly, inexorably pulling itself from the depths. Its head swiveled, its glowing eyes sweeping over the town square, over the terrified faces of Jessica, Michael, David, and Emily, as if assessing its new domain. There was no intelligence in those eyes, only a primordial hunger, a vast, ancient emptiness that promised oblivion. Jessica felt a primal urge to flee, to turn and run as fast and as far as her legs could carry her, but her feet were rooted to the spot. A morbid fascination, a terror-stricken awe held her captive. This was it, the secret. This was the source of the town's suffering, the root of its darkness. This was the thing that had been hidden under the gazebo. As more of the creature's body became visible, its immense size became even more apparent. It was easily 30 feet tall, its scales rippling with unseen muscles, its form a grotesque parody of something reptilian, yet so much more. It seemed to be anchored somehow to the chasm, pulling itself out slowly, as if bound by invisible chains or held back by the very fabric of reality. The air around it grew colder, the stench of decay intensifying, now mixed with a coppery metallic tang that made Jessica's stomach churn. The crimson light pulsed, mirroring the creature's slow, rhythmic breathing, which sounded like grinding stones. It's like nothing I've ever seen," David gasped, his voice barely a whisper, his historian's mind utterly broken by the sight. "Not in any myth, any legend, any fossil record. It doesn't belong here," Emily whimpered, burying her face in Jessica's shoulder. Michael, regaining some semblance of his usual decisiveness, grabbed Jessica's arm. "We have to go now, before it's fully out, before it knows we're here for good." But as he spoke, the creature's head lowered slightly, its glowing eyes fixing directly on them. A low growl like tectonic plates shifting vibrated from its chest. It wasn't a warning. It was an acknowledgement. They had been seen. Suddenly, with a sound like 1,000 timber wolves howling in unison, the last supports of the gazebo gave way. The entire structure, already a wreck, collapsed inward with a deafening roar, showering them with splintered wood and chunks of stone. The ground bucked violently, throwing them all to the earth. Jessica cried out as she hit the unforgiving pavement, her head ringing. When she looked up dazed, the gazebo was gone, swallowed by the ever-widening abyss. And in its place, standing almost fully emerged from the chasm, was the creature. Its full horrifying form was now revealed, a colossal bipedal monstrosity, its thick, pillar-like legs ending in three-toed, clawed feet that dug into the earth, causing miniature tremors. Its arms, equally massive, hung at its sides, its taloned hands flexing slowly, as if testing their power. A long, segmented tail, ridged and scaled like the rest of its body, thrashed slowly behind it, kicking up dust and debris. It stood there, a towering silhouette against the blood-red sky, a monument to ancient terror. Then it moved. Not directly towards them, not yet. Its massive head swiveled again, scanning the square, the surrounding buildings, the silent, empty streets of Oakhaven. It seemed to be taking in its surroundings, its new world. Its internal crimson glow intensified, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch like living things. And as it scanned, an even more terrifying realization dawned on Jessica. The cold, the stench, the oppressive dread that had permeated Oakhaven for so long. It wasn't just from the creature. It was emanating from it, radiating outwards, a wave of despair and decay that seemed to be actively draining the life from the very air, from the plants, from the ground itself. The trees around the square, already looking sickly, visibly withered further, their leaves browning and curling in mere seconds, then fluttering to the ground like dead insects. The grass turned brittle, the pavement cracked more deeply. The creature wasn't just a monster. It was a blight, a living harbinger of entropy. It's killing the town," Emily whispered, her voice trembling, pointing a shaky finger at a nearby rose bush that had just turned to dust. Michael scrambled to his feet, pulling Jessica up with him. "We can't stay here. We have to warn everyone. The whole town is in danger." But before they could take a step, the creature let out another roar, this one different. It wasn't just a sound of fury. It was a sound of something being drawn to it. From the surrounding streets, from the shadows between the buildings, from the very corners of their vision, shapes began to stir. Pale, shambling forms, indistinct in the dim, pulsing light. They were slow, almost hesitant at first, but then they began to move with a single horrifying purpose, drawn by the creature's call. Figures that looked vaguely human, but gaunt, skeletal, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their eyes, where they could be seen, glowed with a faint, sickly green light. The missing people, the Oakhaven disappearances, they weren't gone. They weren't dead. They were changed. They were coming. Jessica's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a monster in a hole. This was about an army of the damned, being awakened and commanded by an ancient, unspeakable horror. The creature in the square wasn't just emerging. It was reclaiming what it had lost, what it had corrupted, what it had been feeding upon for generations. The shambling figures, numbering dozens now, began to converge on the square, their collective, rasping breaths adding to the chilling symphony of decay. They moved with a disturbing silence, their footsteps barely audible, their presence a suffocating weight. The group was trapped. In front of them, the colossal creature, a living embodiment of ancient evil. Behind them, a growing horde of the reanimated, their former neighbors, now mere puppets of the horror that stood revealed. "There's nowhere to go," David mumbled, his voice devoid of hope. But Michael, ever the pragmatist, scanned the square desperately. "The library. It's the closest solid building. Maybe we can barricade ourselves, find a way to communicate, find something to stop this." It was a desperate gamble, a suicidal dash, but it was their only option. The creature, sensing their intent, let out a low, rumbling growl, and the reanimated figures picked up their pace, their movements becoming more frantic, more aggressive, their sickly green eyes fixed on Jessica and her friends, an empty malevolence in their gaze. "Now!" Michael screamed, grabbing Emily and pulling her, while Jessica, seizing David's arm, forced her own terrified legs into motion. They broke into a desperate sprint, a race against an impossibly ancient monster and an army of the undead, towards the sanctuary of knowledge that now seemed like their only hope. The library's heavy oak doors, usually a symbol of quiet study, now represented their last fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness. Every step was a thunderous echo in the suffocating silence of the square, every breath a gasp of frigid, decaying air. The creature watched them, its glowing eyes tracking their every move, a silent, predatory amusement in its ancient gaze. The ground continued to tremble, the very fabric of Oakhaven unraveling around them. The ground continued to tremble, the very fabric of Oakhaven unraveling around them. Michael, Jessica, and David didn't move, couldn't move, their bodies frozen in a tableau of pure, unadulterated terror. The creature, a monolithic horror of shadow and ancient bone, stretched its grotesque form, its glowing eyes fixated on them with an unnerving, almost playful intensity. It wasn't just a beast, it was an intelligence, an ancient, malevolent consciousness that had been biding its time, and now it was awake. A guttural sound like stones grinding against each other rumbled from its chest, echoing through the cavern. It was a sound that vibrated not just in their ears, but in their very bones, threatening to shatter them from the inside out. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling as larger chunks of earth began to detach, plunging into the inky abyss that had opened beneath the creature. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of decay and something else. Something metallic and acrid, like ozone and dried blood. "We have to move," Jessica finally gasped, her voice a raw whisper, barely audible above the groaning earth. Her eyes were wide, darting between the creature and the crumbling cavern around them, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "Where?" David croaked, his gaze glued to the creature's eyes. They were mesmerizing, like twin embers in the suffocating darkness, promising an end that was both unimaginable and inevitable. "It's everywhere." As if in response, the creature took a step, its massive clawed foot shaking the very foundations of the subterranean chamber. The ground beneath their feet bucked violently, throwing them off balance. Michael stumbled, his hand scraping against the rough stone wall, a jolt of pain barely registering amidst the overwhelming fear. He could feel the cold seeping into his skin, a chilling premonition of what awaited them. The creature's head tilted, a silent question in its glowing gaze, or perhaps a silent challenge. It seemed to be enjoying their terror, drawing sustenance from it, growing stronger with every beat of their frantic hearts. It wasn't just a monster, it was a predator of fear itself. Suddenly, a blinding flash erupted from the creature's chest, a burst of pale, sickly green light that momentarily illuminated the full horror of its form. Skeletal protrusions, sharp as razors, jutted from its back and shoulders, catching the light like obsidian shards. Its skin, if it could be called that, was a mosaic of leathery scales and exposed bone, pulsating with an unseen, unnatural energy. The light receded as quickly as it came, plunging them back into a deeper, more profound darkness, punctuated only by those two malevolent eyes. It's feeding," Michael stammered, a terrible realization dawning on him. "On Oakhaven. On us." The tremor escalated into a full-blown earthquake. Above them, the sounds of destruction became deafening. They could hear the distant, terrifying symphony of splintering wood, shattering glass, and collapsing masonry. Oakhaven was not just unraveling. It was being consumed, pulled into the abyss by the creature's awakening. The town square, the familiar streets, their homes, all were being swallowed by the hunger from beneath. "The town," Jessica whispered, tears streaming down her face, not just from fear, but from a profound grief. "Everyone." A massive crack snaked across the cavern ceiling, widening with alarming speed. Dust and small rocks rained down, followed by larger chunks, The very air grew thick with particulate matter, making it hard to breathe. The ancient structure was giving way, threatening to bury them alive with the creature. "We can't just stand here," David yelled, his voice cracking. He grabbed a loose, jagged piece of stone from the ground, a futile weapon against an impossible foe. "We have to do something." The creature let out another low rumble, its massive head turning slowly, deliberately towards David. Its glowing eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Michael felt a surge of something beyond fear. A cold, primal anger. This thing had taken everything. It was taking Oakhaven. It would not take them without a fight. "The symbols!" Michael suddenly shouted, his voice hoarse. He remembered the intricate carvings on the gazebo's base, the strange patterns in the archives. They weren't just warnings, they were instructions. A way to seal it. Jessica's head snapped towards him, a flicker of desperate hope in her eyes. "What? What instructions?" "The old texts, the carvings on the original stone," Michael explained, his mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of ancient knowledge he'd glimpsed. They spoke of a resonance, a harmonic frequency that could disrupt its essence, force it back into slumber. David scoffed, still clutching his stone. "A frequency? Michael, we're in a collapsing cave with a literal monster from hell. How are we supposed to generate a harmonic frequency?" "The gazebo." Michael pointed frantically towards the remnants of the stone structure, now barely visible through the dust, its intricate carvings still faintly glowing with the residual energy of the creature's awakening. It was designed to be a conduit. Focus. That's why the town elders kept rebuilding it, keep its power active, even if they didn't fully understand why. The creature, sensing their renewed determination, let out a piercing shriek that vibrated through the cavern, shaking loose even more debris. It lunged forward, not at them but at a massive support column near the far wall. Its clawed hand tore through the ancient stone as if it were paper, sending a shower of pulverized rock flying. The ceiling above them groaned ominously, threatening to collapse entirely. They were running out of time. "So what do we do, Michael?" Jessica urged, her voice laced with desperation. "Sing to it? Play a flute." Michael's eyes scanned the chamber, the collapsing walls, the glowing symbols, the terrifying creature. His gaze landed on the broken pieces of the gazebo, specifically the central pedestal, now cracked but still standing amidst the rubble. He remembered a passage from the old journal, something about the heart of the melody and the voice of the earth. "The chime," he blurted out. "The ancient chime. The one Emily found in the archives, that old brass piece shaped like a twisted knot. It wasn't just an artifact. It was a key, a tuning fork for the resonance." Jessica's face paled. "The chime? But Emily was carrying it when she went back to the archives. We didn't get it back." A cold dread settled in Michael's stomach. Emily, brave, curious Emily, had ventured back into the archives, perhaps trying to find more answers, and they hadn't seen her since the initial chaos. Had she been consumed by the creature's awakening? Or was there a chance? Suddenly, a faint metallic glint caught Michael's eye amidst a pile of rubble near where the archive's entrance had been. It was small, almost insignificant, but the shape was unmistakable. The twisted knot of ancient brass, partially buried. "There!" Michael yelled, pointing. "It's there, near the archive's entrance." The creature, sensing their focus shift, let out another deafening roar. It turned its attention back to them, its glowing eyes burning with renewed malice. It took another ponderous step, its massive form filling their vision, blocking any path to the chime. The ground beneath their feet began to fracture, deep fissures appearing, some glowing with that same sickly green light. "David, distract it," Michael ordered, his voice surprisingly steady despite the terror gripping him. "Jessica, help me clear these rocks near the gazebo pedestal. We need to get the chime to the center." David, his face a mask of terror, hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then with a primal scream he hurled the jagged stone piece he held, aiming for one of the creature's glowing eyes. It was a pathetic projectile against such a behemoth, but it struck the creature's shoulder with a dull thud, momentarily drawing its attention away from Michael and Jessica. The creature didn't even flinch, but its head snapped towards David, a low growl emanating from its chest. Its massive hand, clawed and ancient, began to rise slowly, deliberately towards him. "Now!" Michael screamed, already scrambling over the unstable ground towards the chime. Jessica, her face streaked with tears and dirt, followed him, her hands tearing at the loose rocks near the broken gazebo pedestal. The air grew thick with the stench of pulverized stone and the creature's unholy breath. Michael reached the chime, his fingers closing around the cold, oddly warm brass. It felt ancient, heavy, humming faintly in his grasp. He looked up, his heart pounding in his chest. David was cornered, the creature's shadow looming over him, its clawed hand descending. "David, run!" Jessica shrieked, her voice raw with terror. But David stood his ground, his eyes locked on the creature, a desperate defiance in his stance. He knew he was buying them time. A precious few seconds that might be the difference between Oakhaven's destruction and its salvation. Michael, clutching the chime, scrambled back towards the gazebo pedestal. The ground was heaving, making every step a monumental effort. Jessica was frantically clearing the last of the debris, her hands bleeding from the sharp edges of the stone. "Michael, hurry!" she cried, her eyes wide with fear as she glanced at David and the descending claw. He reached the pedestal, his breath ragged. The central depression, where the original gazebo's heart would have been, was still intact. He placed the chime into it. It fit perfectly, settling into the ancient stone with a soft click. As it did, the intricate symbols on the pedestal and indeed, all the remaining parts of the gazebo, began to glow with a faint, steady blue light, contrasting sharply with the creature's sickly green. A low hum, barely audible at first, began to emanate from the chime, vibrating through the stone, through the ground, and into Michael's very core. It was a pure, resonant tone, unlike anything he had ever heard, a sound that seemed to resonate with the ancient stones of the earth itself. The creature paused, its descending claw hovering mere feet above David's head. Its glowing eyes flickered, as if confused or perhaps in pain. The blue light from the gazebo intensified, pushing back against the creature's oppressive aura. The tremor in the ground lessened momentarily. "It's working!" Jessica screamed, a desperate hope igniting in her voice. But the creature was not defeated. With a furious roar, louder and more terrifying than any before, it slammed its massive claw down, not on David, but on the ground directly beside him, sending a shockwave that tore through the cavern. The entire structure groaned, and then with a terrifying finality, the ceiling above them began to give way completely. Massive chunks of earth and stone, the very foundations of Oakhaven, started to collapse inward, plunging into the abyss. The blue light from the chime pulsed violently, struggling against the overwhelming force of the creature's rage and the collapsing world. The air grew thick with dust and the acrid stench of ozone. Michael gripped the chime, his knuckles white, feeling its power surge, yet also feeling the immense pressure of the collapsing world. He knew this was it. This was their last chance. He had to amplify the chime's power, to make it resonate with the heart of Oakhaven, even as Oakhaven was destroyed around them. He had to become one with its song, or they would all be lost. He closed his eyes, the chime's vibrations coursing through his very bones, a symphony of desperate hope against the cacophony of a world tearing itself apart. The ground beneath him bucked and groaned, the gazebo's wooden frame groaning like a dying beast. Dust and debris rained down, the air thick with the smell of ozone and crumbling stone. He could feel the void, a cold, hungry nothingness, clawing at the edges of his mind, trying to snuff out the chime's fragile melody. Michael reached out, not with his hands but with something deeper, something primal. He pictured Oakhaven, not just the physical structures collapsing around him, but the memories embedded within its soil, the laughter echoing in the town square, the quiet strength of its people. He saw Jessica's fierce determination, David's unwavering loyalty, even the stern but protective gaze of Mrs. Henderson. He saw the generations of lives lived, loved, and lost within these streets, all connected by an invisible thread, a collective heartbeat. That was Oakhaven's heart. That was the essence the chime needed to amplify. He poured every ounce of his being into the chime, a conduit of raw, desperate will. The chime's melody, once a gentle hum, began to swell, pushing back against the encroaching darkness with a palpable force. It was no longer just a sound, it was a barrier, a shield of pure light and resonance. The shadowy figures which had been pressing in recoiled, their forms flickering like dying embers against the intensifying glow. Their guttural cries, once chilling, now sounded like frustrated whispers against the chime's growing power. The void shrieked, a sound that wasn't heard but felt, a tearing at the fabric of existence. Cracks spiderwebbed across the sky, not just in the clouds, but in the very air itself, revealing glimpses of a churning, chaotic abyss beyond. Buildings twisted and warped, not just collapsing but dissolving into shimmering dust. The ground beneath the gazebo began to split, revealing a deeper, darker chasm, radiating an unnatural cold. But Michael held fast, his focus absolute, his connection to the chime unbreakable. He felt the chime drawing on him, not just his physical energy, but his very life force, his memories, his dreams. It was an exchange, a desperate pact. He was giving everything, becoming part of the chime's song, and in return the chime was fighting for Oakhaven, for the world. He felt a searing pain, as if every nerve ending was alight, but he pushed through it, fueled by an understanding that transcended mere survival. This wasn't just about saving himself. It was about honoring the silent protectors who had come before, about safeguarding the fragile beauty of existence. Then something shifted. The chime song reached a crescendo, a pure, resonant tone that vibrated through every molecule of air, every speck of dust, every fiber of being. It wasn't just pushing back, it was reweaving. The cracks in the sky began to mend, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The dissolving buildings shimmered, and then impossibly solidified, though scarred and weathered. The ground that had split beneath the gazebo began to knit itself back together, the earth groaning in protest, then settling. The shadowy figures, caught in the wave of pure energy, screamed, a sound that was suddenly audible, filled with agony and rage. They dissolved, not into dust, but into nothingness, their forms unraveling as if they had never existed. The cold, hungry void, which had threatened to swallow Oakhaven whole, recoiled, shrinking back into the depths from which it had come, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone and a profound quiet. The destructive force was gone. The world stabilized, though it was a world forever changed. Michael collapsed, the chime song fading to a gentle hum, its light dimming to a soft glow. He lay amidst the debris, his body racked with exhaustion, his mind a whirlwind of sensation and memory. He was conscious, but barely. His eyes fluttered open, seeing the familiar, yet strangely new sky above him. The sun was breaking through the lingering haze, casting long shadows across the battered town square. Jessica and David were there, their faces streaked with dirt and tears, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and relief. They rushed to him, their hands trembling as they helped him sit up. "Michael, are you okay?" Jessica whispered, her voice hoarse. He nodded, a weak smile touching his lips. "We did it," he rasped, his throat raw. "Oakhaven, it's safe." But safe was a relative term. The town was scarred. Buildings stood, but many were damaged. Roofs caved in, walls cracked. The town square was a mess of rubble. The gazebo itself tilted precariously, its paint peeling, its wood splintered. Yet it stood. Oakhaven stood. As the dust settled and the first rays of full sunlight bathed the square, the townspeople began to emerge from their homes, from wherever they had taken shelter. Their faces were a mixture of confusion, fear, and dawning awe. They looked at the damaged town, then at the still glowing chime under the ruined gazebo, and finally at Michael, Jessica, and David. Did they remember? Did they understand what had just transpired? Michael looked into their eyes, searching. There was a flicker of something, a shared trauma, a collective nightmare, but also a profound sense of relief, a deep-seated gratitude that they couldn't quite articulate. It was as if their minds had instinctively shielded them from the full horror, leaving only the echo of a terrible storm that had miraculously passed. In the days and weeks that followed, Oakhaven began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. The story that emerged, the one everyone seemed to tacitly agree upon, was that an unprecedented, localized earthquake had struck, causing immense damage but miraculously sparing most lives. The town rallied, neighbors helping neighbors, a spirit of community stronger than ever. But Michael, Jessica, and David, they knew the truth. They shared glances, unspoken understandings. They had witnessed the unraveling of reality, the ancient evil that had lurked beneath their peaceful town. They had seen the chime, an artifact of immense power and mystery, reveal its true purpose. The chime itself, once a vibrant source of power, now hummed faintly, its light almost imperceptible, as if exhausted. Michael knew it had expended nearly all its energy, perhaps even drawing on his own life force, to repel the void. It was dormant but not dead. It was a silent sentinel, a reminder of the thin veil between their world and something far older, far darker. They worked tirelessly to secure the gazebo to protect the chime. It was no longer a hidden secret, but an unspoken understanding among the few who knew. They became its guardians, its silent protectors, just as the generations before them had been. Michael never left Oakhaven. He felt an unbreakable bond to the town, not just because he had saved it, but because he had become part of its history, part of its very essence. He saw the world differently now, with a deeper appreciation for its fragile beauty, and a chilling awareness of the unseen forces that constantly sought to unravel it. He often walked through the rebuilt town square, the chime's faint hum a constant companion in his mind, a secret melody only he could truly hear. Jessica, too, found a new purpose. She became a fierce advocate for the town's preservation, ensuring its unique history and the quiet strength of its people were celebrated. She knew the secret was far too dangerous to ever truly reveal, but she also knew its existence had shaped them all, making Oakhaven more than just a dot on a map. David, ever the pragmatist, used his skills to help rebuild, but his eyes held a newfound depth. He understood that some mysteries were better left undisturbed, and some truths were too vast for the human mind to fully comprehend. Yet he was ready. Should the void ever stir again, he would stand with Michael and Jessica, a quiet guardian of the secret under the gazebo. The town square gazebo stood again, meticulously repaired, painted a vibrant white. Children played beneath its shade, unaware of the ancient power that slumbered beneath their feet. Tourists visited, admiring its quaint charm, oblivious to the existential battle that had raged there. Oakhaven seemed to return to normal, a picture of idyllic small-town life. But for those who knew, for Michael, Jessica, and David, the world was forever changed. The secret wasn't just under the gazebo anymore. It was woven into the very fabric of Oakhaven, a silent promise, a constant vigilance. They understood that some secrets, once unearthed, could never truly be buried again. They lived with the knowledge that beneath the surface of their ordinary lives, an extraordinary truth lay hidden, a whisper of ancient power waiting. And they knew with a chilling certainty that the chime's song, though faint, would always be a part of them, a reminder that the world was far stranger, far more mysterious, and far more dangerous than anyone could ever truly imagine. The question lingered, a subtle chill at the back of their minds. What other ancient forces, what other hidden powers, lay dormant beneath the quiet towns and familiar landscapes of their world, waiting for the right moment to stir once more?